Okay, well, I think we're at 5 minutes past, so we should be able to kick off the session. A very good afternoon to you all. I hope your Septembers have gotten off to a great start and you've had a great summer. Welcome to this webinar, which is titled Harnessing the Power of Open Source AI. I think looking across the sort of names on the screen, I do spot a number of familiar attendees, but for those who have not had the pleasure to meet yet, I'm Usman, Program Manager for Artificial Intelligence at techUK. So I lead our AI adoption program and will also be chairing today's discussion. For those who are not aware of what techUK is, we are the UK's technology trade association with over 1,000 members. Majority of whom are startups and SMEs, but we do have a number of large organizations in membership too, some of whom are on this call. Before I sort of get into the discussion and allow the incredible panel to introduce themselves, I do want to provide a bit of context in terms of what the series is, where the event fits in, but also why it's important. So we launched our AI Leaders series back in March to really bring together some of the brightest minds in artificial intelligence to discuss latest trends, cutting edge developments, and really to sort of act as a forum to sort of understand what comes next. And I think to that end, we've looked at some incredible topics to date, which I think a number of you may have already followed, including agentic AI, which, as I'm sure many of you know, is very much the next frontier of artificial intelligence, but also small language models, which are very much sort of small, compact alternative to other traditional models, which I'm sure most of you are aware of. But this event, and indeed this series, is important given the policy context, given that the UK government has a strong commitment to boosting economic growth, with the AI sector being a sort of pivotal way in order to achieving that. So we hope to have a really incredible discussion today, looking at the trends, but also looking at the policy context behind that. So before we kick off into the main discussion, just a few house rules, which I did input already into the chat function. So this session will be recorded. We'll have a recording on YouTube in the coming days, along with an event roundup. And as I also mentioned, please do ensure that your cameras and microphones are turned off, just to allow the speakers to have a good discussion without any interruptions. And please do use the chat function as well. So we'll field any questions at the end of this session. So with that being said, I'm really excited for this particular webinar. We've spent quite some time pulling it together, and I think in that sense, we've also got an incredible lineup of speakers who will bring a different set of expertise, knowledge from across the AI ecosystem to really explain where we are with respect to open source, but also where we're going. And so I may just pause to allow each of the panel to introduce themselves. So we have Sophie from Meta, Sahil from Databricks, Erica from Red Hat, and Kevin from the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. Sophie, I may pause to allow you to give a quick introduction in terms of your background and I suppose anything else in relation to that.
Nothing like going first, or someone's got to start there. So thank you so much for the introduction there. That was brilliant, and hopefully we are a brilliant discussion for you today. So hi everyone, I'm Sophie England. I work at Meta. I have been at Meta for 7 years, which feels in cat years like 25 years. I have been in the policy team that whole time. They have worked on all sorts of things from online safety, metaverse, and now I lead all our work on AI policy in the UK. So that involves everything from the partnerships we have with government. So we recently launched a $1 million open source fellowship program with governments. That's something I worked on, but also leading our work on the potential upcoming AI bill, as well as discussions around other ways we can partner and work with government and AI adoption. So thank you for having me.
Great, thanks, Sophie. It's great to have you on board. Sahil, I'll go to you next.
Sure thing. Thanks for the intro, Usman. So hi everyone, my name's Sahil. I currently work at Databricks as a solutions architect within our UK public sector field engineering team. So I work cross government, helping lots of different customers, I guess, increase their maturity when it comes to both data and AI, but then also a bit more of a specialist in ML and AI across the different customers. And my prior background was around like natural language processing and large language models. So yeah.
Thanks, Sahil. Great to have you on board as well. Eric, I'll go to you next.
Yeah, thanks, Usman. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Erika Langhi. I'm a solution architect and I work at Red Hat currently. I've been at Red Hat for 20 years. I started actually my career with machine learning and then moved to data and open source. So it's a great feeling actually to be able to work again with AI and seeing the data fueling actually the AI applications and also open source driving the innovation. So I'm looking forward to a great conversation and thanks for having me.
Thanks, Erica. And last but not least, Kevin, we'll go to you.
Thank you, Usman. I'm Kevin Zandermann, Policy Manager at the Tony Blair Institute. I've been at the TBI for around 4 years now, mostly dealing with AI and with tech policy in general. Last year I was seconded to the Brussels office of TBI because we've opened an office there, so to sort of kickstart our engagement with the European Commission on these matters. And I'm really pleased to be here. And I want to commend also to you, Usman, because it's quite rare to have actual technical people and policy people on the same panel. So I'm very excited for this discussion.
Thanks, Kevin. And it's a valid point. We're sort of looking to convene the key stakeholders to ensure that the entire ecosystem, if we can, get onto the panel, but we'll definitely try and do so. So thank you very much, and yeah, looking forward to the breadth of expertise that you'll bring. Right, so we'll actually get into the main discussion here, which deals with understanding what open source is. I think very much we're sort of at a point where there was lots of terminology, lots of acronyms, and in terms of AI developments, there have been obviously quite a lot, certainly since the advent of the Gen AI boom. But it's also ushered in a number of new terms, including open source, open weight, and openness. So I'd be keen to really understand from each of you about what open source means to you. How it's sort of different from, let's say, other comparable terminologies. So Sahil, I might kick off with you if that's okay. I know that you've got a few distinctions to make, but also potentially some of the practical applications, but I'll hand over to the subject matter experts.
No, sure thing. I think it's a topic I'm quite passionate about. I've been following a lot of LLM and AI development for quite a while, and open source is almost sometimes a bit of an overused term, I think, across industry, especially when it comes to AI. And I think really what I wanted to bring to this as well is to debunk what actually open source means in terms of models, frameworks, applications. So the majority of models today that are available, like Llama, Cohere, that are open, they're actually open weights. So the model weights are open, and the ability to be able to perform inference, like the C code that comes along with it, that is open. But open source by definition needs it to be reproducible. So you being able to reproduce the actual model, but then also being able to use it in any way you'd like. So also some of these models that open weights, they'll have conditions around you can't use this for commercial purposes. You've got to reach out to us. So some providers do that as well. So when we're talking here today, I think the majority of when it comes to models, it'll be open weight models and what are the advantages that they provide. But then also it's not just the models that are providing a lot of things for the ecosystem. I think there's a lot of frameworks out there, and I think we'll probably get onto that with Red Hat and VLLM and the things that we do in terms of ML Flow, a framework to be able to perform machine learning and AI. But then also there's applications as well that are accelerators that are built by organizations like Microsoft. The government has an incubator for artificial intelligence that makes these sorts of accelerators. So, and all of these different components actually help in very different ways and push the scene forward in different ways. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of put that distinction out there.
Fantastic, and thank you. I think it's really, really clear, and also sort of brought it down to reality where possible. And I think you definitely sort of touched on the need to be able to sort of freely use it, study, and modify where possible, but also made some good distinctions in terms of open weight and so on. So thank you for that. Sophie, I might turn to you next, if that's okay. I know there are a few points to be raised, but also I think you alluded to the. So I think everyone should be able to hear. Is that okay? Okay, thank you. I think we also.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I think you mentioned obviously the action plan, but also the fellowship. So yeah, keen to hear more.
Well, I was just going to respond, and I don't want to fall out with my fellow panelists 2 minutes in, which is just not a great way to start. But I guess I just slightly like counter what Sahil said, just to make sure there's sort of around it, that what Sahil described isn't probably how Meta sees it. And I'm not a technical expert, I'm a policy person, so please don't get into the technical details. But just from a Meta perspective, I just have to kind of make sure that our view is being represented here. Like, our view is that there isn't a single open source definition. Defining it is a challenge. A lot of industry disagree with the definition, and us included in that industry bucket. There's a lot of complexity to today's rapidly changing AI models and what's going on there. We do make Llama free and openly accessible, and our license and acceptable use policies keep people safe. The reasons we put those license rules and acceptable use policies are purely around safety. That you can't build the bio sort of medical weapons and that kind of thing, which I think we'd all agree is not great. Why don't we call ourselves open weight, as Sahil said? As kind of people have said, we don't believe that fully captures everything that we make available as a company. We make lots of things available, including reference code, research, technical papers, lots of stuff around that. So let's not get into debate here, because I'm definitely not the right person to be having that discussion. But I just wanted to make clear that Sahil's representing a really well advocated viewpoint there, but there are other views on what he said, and that's just our view as Meta and as someone in the industry kind of saying that. But so I just wanted to kind of set that out, which I hopefully weren't going to get into this in like the first 2 minutes. So Sahil's apologies.
No, that's okay, and I think that's an important distinction to make. Meta contributed more than most organizations to open source, so I think they definitely take part in like what the definition is. So yeah.
I will just take 1 minute just to explain a bit about Meta, because we're not the same as like your OpenAI and some of the other big players that people kind of reference with AI. Actually, a lot of people forget that we aren't just a social media company. So just to kind of explain a little about Meta and how we work from an AI perspective, since the earliest days of like our products, AI has been a big part of them. It's a huge foundation, and we are massively all in on AI. That's been since sort of the early noughties that we've been using AI in a lot of our family of apps, as we call them. So that's WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook, etc. But alongside our own usage, we have open sourced a bunch of models, and the LLM models, and they are helpfully called Llama, which is very nice with the LLM, but it is actually Llama as in like the animal. They're a bunch of families, and there's a huge number of those models in that series. So we've got lightweight models, but also some huge models that we release in Llama 4. So that's kind of Meta's contribution. So we use it ourselves, but also we open source it. So a lot of our products, and our belief is that we should make them as acceptable and open to everyone. We've had over 1 billion downloads. It's probably gone up since I've even say that figure. 1.2 was the last I saw, and there's a huge variety of them. I guess that's just a little bit about who Meta is and our view on what AI is and our kind of contribution to it. 65 billion we announced to build out on infrastructure last year. So we're all in is a kind of the headline to take here. In terms of Meta's view on it and like where the UK is I guess we're a bit behind, I'd say, on open source. I'd say there's been like, from a government regulatory perspective, we've seen that I've actually seen from government a huge shift behind closed doors around open source, and having gone from what is open source, there's now actually a lot of interest in open source right at the top, and I'm really excited about that. We've met figures right to the top down to kind of day-to-day civil servants, and there's definitely a lot of appetite and understanding of open source. I'm super excited about that, but we've yet to see anyone actually say anything publicly about it, and I think that is where we are pushing, and others in the industry like Mozilla, who are also very interested in open source, are really pushing the Opportunities Action Plan. Brilliant, launched in January by the brilliant Matt Clifford. We think it's fantastic, think it's brilliant. Did they mention open source? No. There was no reference to it. There hasn't been anything really in the AI playbook. We haven't seen it coming out in the industrial strategy. There was no reference of it. So I guess our big thing here is actually it's really missing. And we know behind the scenes they were very excited about the open source fellowship I mentioned. We've just closed applications for a number of fellows to go into government to build open source solutions for government. So we know they're excited about it. We know they think it's great, and they know that it's important for their sovereign strategy. They want to be more sovereign as a country, but very little reference, and that would be my big kind of point to kind of land quite early on. But I realise I've been speaking for quite a long time, so I'll hand back over to you, Usman.
No, not at all. Thank you, Sophie, and so I think we sort of recognise the sort of broad church nature of this, and I think sort of bringing different perspectives is certainly what we're looking for. So thank you for that. Erica, I might turn to you next if that's okay. Just in terms of how I know you've got a few points in terms of how this sort of works in practice, open source models, in terms of sort of downloading and fine tuning and so on. So I'll hand over to you for some insights on that or anything else.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, I think my reflection, we talked about open weights, and that's definitely important. But there are different interpretations, as you're saying, like about the open source. But I'd like to put the focus on the data, actually, because the data are actually the core feature to train those models. And sometimes as an AI consumer, if I see those models as a black box, I can lose the trust. So for me, there should be even more focus on the open data, making the data that have been used to train the model. I mean, can you hear me? Right. Okay.
We can, yes. Yeah.
So that is really crucial to me for many reasons. First of all, to gain a trust in the AI consumers and make sure that we have some sort of explainability of the decisions that have been taken by the AI solution, but also in terms of having like addressing concerns like bias and also vulnerabilities, because you know, ultimately we're building AI solutions that should be efficient for everyone and should support everyone. So we need to make sure that those data provide a representation of all the different categories. There's a lot of focus and discussions now about AI ethics, but if we want to have those AI solutions embedded in our daily lives, and I'm talking about different use cases, including healthcare, say, or you know, interactions with government departments, that the focus on data should not be overlooked. That's my view, to have that really AI open, transparent systems implemented.
Thank you, and some really interesting insights. And I think in terms of open source transparency as a whole, I think there are certainly cases where fine tuning can lead to specific use cases, but also easy auditing for bias and compliance. I think some really good points which we'll certainly cover later on in the session as well in terms of developing that. Thank you, Kevin. I'll go to you next. I know you've got a few sort of perspectives on this, and I think given your sort of interest in specialities and geopolitics, I think certainly keen to sort of hear your perspectives, but I'll hand over to you.
Sure. No, I mean, I think, we're having this debate because the open source initiative hasn't done the homework yet, which means, to formalize its definition. I mean, I think, again, like it's, as, our Sahil and Eric have said, I mean, like, for practitioners, it can mean like many different things. And I think, from the sort of policy side, I think we were guilty of trying to identify an easy binary between, closed model and open models, because it was sort of easier and more intuitive. And then luckily, people like Irene Solomon, like 4 years ago, like intervened to like, sort of introduce the concept of gradient and, and sort of make people understand like the various different like degrees of openness of a model. I mean, in theory, the open source initiative should formalize, I think, a definition by the end of the year, but specifically for AI, because of course at the beginning it was just a sort of synonym of free software in the 90s when the term sort of originally appeared. But the sort of consensus from the OSI revolves around 4 freedoms, which hint at what's been said before. So I've got the 4 freedoms are the use of the system for any purpose without permission, showing how the how the system works. So meaning that I'm able to inspect the components, modify the system, including changing the outputs, and share the system with or without modification. And all these 4 freedoms obviously have like sort of different ramifications at the data, the code, the code, and the model layer. And then we can get more into that. But I think it's important to understand that it's a word that tries to encapsulate practices. So it's always tricky when a definition tries to do that.
Definitely, and I think there's definitely a need to decode this and sort of add some sort of certainty where possible. And I think it's certainly an area where both researchers but also developers can contribute in a form of an ecosystem to really build on work where possible and to identify where the gaps are. So thank you for that. We are on time, which is good. And I think this is probably a good segue into the next segment, which I think we've slightly touched on already, but is in relation to the opportunities of open source. So it's very much a fast-moving field. I think, as we all are willing to accept, it's not a passing phase, I should say, but there are certainly some geopolitical headwinds. Thinking about the likes of, let's say, DeepSeek, obviously had the version 3 model, R1 models out in China, and so on. So I think to that end, the development game is really adapting and changing in different ways. So an open question to the panel. Where do you see the biggest opportunities? And I think with webinars like this or sessions like this, the big question is often the why. So, why does this matter? If you're an individual, a business, someone who's really interested in economic growth, spreading benefits across society and, let's say, all nations and regions, if you take a UK perspective, why is it important? What are the opportunities? Why is it important? And are there any potential emerging trends that you see? Sophie, can I start with you, if that's okay? I know you've got a few reflections, which I think you've already touched on, but happy to hear anything else.
Yeah, I mean, at a really basic level, like, it's such a big opportunity for businesses, small businesses, because you can go on to llama.com right now, download the model and have a go. There's no barrier to entry. You're not stuck in a contract. You're not having to sign up to something, that I think it is basic level, is it's free and accessible. People always ask, why are Meta not giving billions of dollars to do X, Y, and Z? It's because we're building these amazing models and making them free for everybody. So that's kind of our premise, is we are giving this incredible technology away for free. And everyone's like, well, why would you do that? You're Meta. The reason is the whole point of open source is, if you give it to the world, they make it better. It's good for the economy and it's good for innovation, because people can see what we built, they can give feedback, make it better, and then it's better for our business, right? We're not philanthropic in totality of doing this. We use these models in our own products, as I outlined at the beginning. So this stuff is free. Anyone can have a go there, and I'm always surprised how few people just have a go with it. People obviously have a go with ChatGPT, which is great, and that's a really entry way to do it. But if you're a small business watching this, I would really implore you. You can get it on llama.com. That's not always the easiest way. You can get it through other partners, and there are other open source providers too. But just have a go. We're seeing a lot of acceleration of AI adoption in the global south in a way that they in some ways going to leapfrog over, because they're very good at getting technology that is free and accessible and using it and building up. We saw that with WhatsApp, they were fast adopters. They sort of skipped their mobile banking apps and just went straight to WhatsApp payments. They're light years ahead of us in places like India on getting this free technology and making it work for them. So at its most basic level, I think there's an incredible opportunity for the UK, for any small business, because you own that technology. No one can turn that off tomorrow. I think that's the biggest bit that we still try and get across to politicians, is no, Meta can't just turn this technology off. It's yours, which is a bit anti everything people think about Meta. But actually, the whole brilliant thing about open source is it's super private. You can download it on your laptop and no one has access to that, which is also great, particularly if you're working in defense or security. So there's an incredible opportunity here. I think, just to kind of get a bit real about where we're at. So we did some analysis with Public, who are a digital agency, of 1,000 contracts the government gave out since 2023. Of those 1,000 contracts, only 1% to 2% of them were open source. So that's the kind of where we're at with government. However, good news, when it comes to actually government building this technology, as in having a go themselves, 22% of that was open source, of which 50% of that was Llama. So super exciting that actually, if you're buying, it is still easier to just go off the shelf and get something. But if you really want to build and invest, which we know in the UK people are very entrepreneurial and like to do those types of things, open source is an incredible technology, and it seems to be much more popular than going to alternatives. So that's kind of my view on the opportunity, but would love to hear particularly from Sahil and Erica, because they're on the front line working with these businesses and bits of government who are doing stuff too.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think there's an element of creativity in just sort of taking that first step. I think there's certainly a fear of sort of missing out with respect to AI, but if you do sort of identify the use cases you're looking to pursue, I think it's certainly an opportunity to sort of lean to let's say, accelerated research and development side of this. There's a shared knowledge sharing aspect too, which can certainly give birth to new applications and to ensure that these developments don't happen in isolation. So yeah, I think that's some really, very interesting points. Sahil, I'll turn to you as well. I know you've got some interesting points to raise, including the democratization side of things, but I'll hand over to the subject matter experts.
Well, I was going to just say on like Sophie's points, I fully agree, especially around open source. When you put that sort of technology out there, it gives the community and lots of different companies the environment to have a look at that technology and, suggest their own ideas. Then, the original company can then iterate on that. It provides a proper community around these sorts of things. And a lot of successful software has went through this, right? So like if I take something like Kubernetes, there's a lot of the cloud companies offer managed services for Kubernetes where they've done their own like improved version of it or something on top. Like you see like the same sorts of things happening with a lot of of Meta's frameworks with like React and PyTorch, where they've got a real community around those sorts of technologies, and then they've been able to just meet more and more needs across the industry. And I actually agree, it's like around the like AI opportunities action plan, there's a lot of talk around, sovereign AI and this sort of stuff, but that's going to need open source frameworks to deploy a lot of this like AI type stuff. They're not going to do this all from scratch. Like I can tell you that, but it'd be good to see, some of that, mentioned alongside sovereign AI, right? We're going to be using some open source type things to deploy this, and this is the way we're going to integrate it with the way, the current industry and government works and that sort of stuff. But just on the point around, what are the opportunities around open source, open models in general? Realistically, the main thing that I think you're going to be able to do with an open model is you're going to be able to fine tune that model, maybe using like an open framework like Unsloth on your specific data. So a lot of providers have provided a model, and they're going after something what we term at Databricks called general intelligence. They're general models, but they're not trained on your data, so they're not in that form. They might not be able to perform as well on benchmarks for your specific business case. But then when you fine tune that on your data, or like add an extra thing like RAG on your data, that's when you're able to get closer to that benchmark. And we're seeing a lot of a lot of our customers have taken Llama's models because we partner quite closely with Meta, and they fine tune it for their specific needs, and then they're able to get like really, really accurate performance on their specific benchmark depending on their use case. And I think this is why is this important, right? Why is it important to try and do these sorts of things? From my experience, when I was trying to deploy, LLMs, in government, the downstream customers weren't, always necessarily happy with, oh, this model isn't, saying the answer in the way I'd expect it to. The language is slightly off. And in those sorts of use cases, that's where training on your own data, or like doing that final bit of training on your data, is really going to come in and help achieve the performance that is required to put something out in production across like thousands of users and customers. So yeah.
Thank you. All really valid and thought-provoking points. I think on the AI Opportunities Action Plan, I think you're right to point that out as well, given the sort of third theme of that is to secure our future through homegrown AI. And I think there's certainly scope for open source to sort of accelerate that revolution, even though we are very much at the foothills of AI's development, and there's more certainly to come, more specialized models, more variety of applications. So yeah, thank you for that. Erica, I'll move on to you next. I think you've also got a few points to make. I think you noted democratization, but also specialized applications. But yeah, happy to hand over to you and keen to hear more.
Yeah, so I'm echoing what Sophie and Sahil already mentioned, basically, because there's definitely a great opportunity for open source and AI. And to me, the important thing is that we're seeing a lot of prototyping at the moment, experimentation, but we're now coming at a point where those prototypes need to be put into production. And that's crucial, because I believe that organization can really derive the value from AI when they integrate those AI models into their processes, into their systems, and the quicker they do that, the better. So first of all, when you put models in production, the reality is that you then have applications consuming those models. And so you want to think about open source platforms in this way that can have the data scientists and the developers collaborating together in order to accelerate this process of like productizing the AI models so that they can be available to provide business value to an organization. And at this point also, there's always like a focus on cost and efficiency and an eye on sustainability as well for organization, because the moment actually you're moving into this like a production life cycle, that's actually the focus for many organizations to derive this value. And I agree with Sophie saying that in some cases, definitely having Llama available to everyone is great. That we are seeing with our customers also an increased interest in smaller models for specific domain specialized use cases, as Sahil was saying, because there are situations where you can have maybe a 7 to 10 billion parameter model that can have similar performance to a large language models, but at a fraction of the cost. So if you look at efficiency, that's really the kind of experience that we're having with our customers at the moment. So that's why an increased interest in open source smaller models. And again, the focus is again on domain specific models, because there is a no size fits it all. So again, in some situations, you don't need a large language model, but you want something specialized on the data of your organization, because this is where the value is coming from. So thinking about that scenario, to me, it's also important to have that knowledge, that domain specific knowledge injected into the model. And not everyone is a data scientist. So there are tools available like InstructLab, where even if you don't have data scientist skills, you don't need to program in Python, say, you can still provide that knowledge into the model. And to me, that is really a way to democratize access to AI, because you can have literally many individuals collaborating to the same model, and also having, you know, the spirit of open source, which is ultimately collaboration that drives innovation. So I see this as well as a direction and opportunity for open source.
Absolutely. You're making incredible points, and I'm trying to take lots of notes, although my handwriting's quite bad. Sorry, Sophie, did you want to comment on that?
I was going to add one thing, before, because I'm sure Kevin wants to come in. Just to kind of outline like some of the benefits. I'd love my fellow panelists to add some too, because we've talked about them in the bits, but I think it's people who are new to this, like why would you use open source like versus closed source, and I think thinking about your use case and performance is a big part of it. So that's a huge but I think, you know, Sahil talked a lot about fine tuning. That's a reason that people would like to use open source. Data security, which I touched on before, like, you know, a lot of the work I do with government, and I know some the other panelists, like that's the most important thing. Like, you know, when we're talking about NHS data, you can't be sending that to a foreign data center. That's just not going to work. So therefore sometimes hosting it, you know, on-prem is the only way to do it, and having that data security. So sometimes you kind of default into having to use an open source model. And then sometimes the cost. I think it'd be interesting to hear, because you guys work with lots of customers, and obviously I have a view for Meta, but sometimes cost, it can be in some circumstances, depending on the use case and how you're using it, cheaper to go open source. So I just wanted to like call out some of the benefits of people who might not be as familiar as to why people pick open source versus closed source. But I would love to hear some of the other views on why they've experienced, why people really go towards open source versus other offerings in the market.
Sure. Any sort of comments in response to that, or should we cover it later on?
I was going to say I can comment on that one specifically. I don't want to take the time away from Kevin. I do think, you know, that small models, like using them in particular, like a fine tuning, like a 2 billion model versus using like a 13 billion model, can be good from like a performance perspective. Like inference will run faster. You can fine tune it against your specific use case if you're trying to like summarize some text, for example. Cost, I think there are like slight differences in cost. I wouldn't say like it's massive, but it's like the open versus closed can be massive, right? Because the open model, you're hosting on your own infrastructure, you're paying probably by the hour for a VM. But then the closed model is like you're probably paying per token. So you're paying per the amount of information that you're giving them. And then they can set that price at whatever they want. So that's the real difference here. And I do see customers doing like an open comparison that when they're doing things at scale, like the paying per the amount that I'm like sending to like the closed source does get quite expensive. So at scale, I'd say yes on an open versus closed model type basis. But when it's like a big versus small and you can host it within your own infrastructure, it's down to your own optimization. But yeah, fully agree, to be honest.
Fantastic, thank you. Kevin, I'll go to you for any closing thoughts for the segment.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll start. I mean, I think it's useful. I mean, again, I'll give the sort of how like policymakers are looking at this right now, including from the AI Opportunities Action Plan. I think particularly in the UK, but also in Europe, like governments are looking at this through the sort of second, smart second mover advantage. So okay, like we haven't developed cutting edge foundation models in both in the UK and in the EU, or the ones that we've got still are not competing at the same level. So how can we win? I mean, where can we actually be competitive? And the sort of current narrative is that for open source and at the application layer, there's enormous opportunity to actually capture tremendous economic value. So that's, I think, that's sort of, let's say, the zeitgeist this year from a sort of policy and regulation perspective, and also the kind of what is the sort of set of incentives that we need to put in place to encourage this process. So that's from the sort of policy side, and also if you look at it more internationally, if the AI Actions summit of earlier this year in February 2025. Organized by France, had open source was a major component to it, much more than AI safety, as was the case under the Rishi Sunak summit in the UK. So the tone around open source has sort of really pivoted to, from that point of view. I mean, Meta launched Roost in Paris, and the Opportunities Action Plan is very much in line with that. And even if we see the new action plan under the Trump administration, it's relatively vague in the sense that it asks for incentives to promote open source development, but it's explicit in sort of defining them as a geostrategic, basically, the geostrategic tool where American leadership is needed. At the same time, it's relatively stoic in taking a stance on this question. It doesn't sort of stigmatize closed models either. So there's a bit of ambiguity there. I think in terms of the opportunities, I mean, Eric and Sahil have described what the opportunities are for again at the application layer for the private sector in the UK. At TBI, we've looked at it for what are the consequences for meta science, for research, particularly in science. And I mean, we already have a huge issue, in the first place, which is the reproducibility crisis. So the fact that most experiments, I mean, some estimates vary, but some say up to 70% of experiments in studies basically cannot be replicated. So the sort of epistemological grounds of a lot of science at the moment can be quite contested. So how can AI sort that? How can we basically help solve this crisis as opposed to compound it? Well, it's intuitive that open source has a role to play, because without it, I mean, again, we are compounding the problem as opposed to resolving it. So we've looked at many examples in the past. For example, NeuroIPS in 2019 introduced reproducibility checklist and actually encouraged code submission, which led to an tremendous increase in the quality of the papers. So, and that has sort of set the new standards, because it means they've got higher quality verifiable submissions, and in general, a wider, again, epistemological shift towards major, much stronger accountability. Or again, the usual AlphaFold, its success was inseparable from the Protein Data Bank, which was an open data set. but it wasn't just an open data set. It basically allowed, like the success was also derivating from the open tools that enabled others to work on it. Or it can, again, very similar story to for the UK biobank. Like the issue for, I think, the UK ecosystem in science and research is that this kind of open source infrastructure is basically treated as like secondary in academia and like by the incentives of academia. So like as a, if I am a researcher, what incentive do I have to invest in those kind of tools on, when ultimately I am measured, my success tends to be measured in terms of, number of publications. So like our sort of policy pitch is to begin, investing very heavily in, sort of changing the structure and incentivizing those forms of contribution, and in measuring like the success and also the success of our researchers and like our research ecosystem. So that's a major area that we looked at, but we we will, open source is going to be a major area of focus for TBI in the next 6 months. So we'll do much more research on it.
Brilliant, thank you. And amazing research coming from the TBI as well. Thank you so much. Conscious of time, I might just add one last thing, which I think you've all alluded to, which is this keyword of collaboration. So I think the scope for collaborative problem solving, looking at a number of use cases ranging from, let's say, bias detection to safety to efficiencies. And I think we're really able to sort of join together in a sort of community of some sorts by doing this. So thank you for that. Conscious of time, so I think we can move on to the next segment, which looks into essentially considerations, which I think we've touched on in some ways already. So essentially with organizations, they're sort of considering adopting or, let's say, contributing to open source projects. I'm keen to hear from all of you about what key factors they should keep in mind in terms of addressing, let's say, any particular issues or challenges that they may sort of encounter. So happy to sort of hand over to anyone who wants to take that question on first. But what are the sort of key challenges that you need to be aware of as a developer or an adopter, I should say?
I can probably start and leave to the rest of the panel. Also because Sophie mentioned about cost, and this is something that we're actually discussing with our customers. And I think in terms of consideration, I would say cost is not only the cost of training a model, but we're seeing more and more focus also in cost of inferencing, because you need to look at the AI life cycle. So as Sahil mentioned before, we're seeing open source frameworks like VLLM that are actually addressing that aspect, the optimization in the inferencing phase, because ultimately you want to have the best experience for the AI consumer. So the response needs to be fast. And VLLM is a great set of libraries and technologies to address like memory management, throughput, but also looking at like managing resources which are very scarce, like the GPUs. So that's something that I can envisage with my customers, seeing more and more in the future. And if I may make another consideration in terms of skills as well, because this was one of the also actions in the AI opportunities action plan, focusing on skills, AI skills. I know that recently the government has put together some measures as well to for an AI upskilling for the workforce in the UK. But I can see this happening more and more. And I think organizations should look at what they have in-house, look at the culture also available in an organization. And again, back to my previous point, thinking not only about developing models, but the entire ecosystem of developers and the data scientists together, because this, in my opinion, is the only way where we can make those AI applications really productive in the future. So I'm leaving the comments to my fellow panelists.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, sorry, Sophie.
No, I said I'm happy to get next. Yeah, Eric, I think you touched on loads of the stuff I was going to, but I'd echo the skills stuff. Like, open source is you do need a bit more skill. Like things like we've talked about, like fine tuning is not like just something you can pick up off the shelf. It does require more skills and expertise, and then that is obviously why people tend to just go to off-shelf solutions. It's easier. I guess one bit that always gets forgotten, actually, I started my career many, many moons ago at Deloitte doing change management, is that this is a huge change for people. And I think people are focusing on like the end product and everything's going to be radically different and we all need to prepare for that on that. But actually, I think there's the opposite at the moment, which is we need to be prepared that we're not going to see this massive change tomorrow. Like this is going to take some time, and it's not going to happen overnight. It was interesting to see the Microsoft Copilot. If anyone saw it, the results of that, they did this big pilot test, and it said something 26 minutes was shaved off people's days, and they saw that as a disappointment. I think that's the big thing we all need to caveat here, is that the technology we're playing with now is still very early on, and like it's still, there are some amazing things it can do, don't get me wrong, and I see some incredible things it's doing in hospitals and for healthcare, and there are some amazing, but for the everyday person thinking about this, they also need to manage their expectations of actually what it's going to do. It's not going to change, like your business is not going to like change overnight, and it's going to take time, and those productivity gains are going to take time. So I think that's the big bit I would say at this moment. That will look different. That will not be what I'm saying in 2-3 years time when these tools are a bit more accessible and you can see those changes very quickly. But I think everyone's sort of thinking this AI silver bullet with like this, the government have gone all in on it and people aren't seeing those returns like immediately, and so are slightly panicking about it. And that's the big bit I would kind of say at this point, is the considerations of like actually really think about the use case. Don't just do it for the sake of it, and actually think about what you're going to get out of it and manage expectations about that too. So that's my kind of more soft skills thoughts on it.
Really great. Sahil, Kevin, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, like both great points. I mean, I think sometimes we're sort of presentism biased, where we expect the revolution to like unfold immediately. TBI may be guilty of this bias occasionally. I mean, obviously, these transformations take time. I mean, if we look at the third industrial revolution, I mean, the microprocessor is from 1971, the fiber optics from 1972, but for the actual ICT revolution to basically trigger like a visible productivity gains, it took 20 years. I mean, the famous Solo paradox, the famous I see but productivity statistics everywhere, I see computer everywhere but in the productivity statistics. So those are complex like phenomena. Obviously, like the difference compared to that revolution is that there's an incredible diffusion infrastructure, which is the internet. So I think it will be very interesting to see like how how much more quickly like this cycle is gonna appear. And again, I think the conversation for countries like the UK, but also for the EU, is what is the right policy mix to enable this. And I mean, I think when it comes to the reskilling, like my take is that the UK has strong foundations. I mean, I think of, for example, courses like conversion masters that Imperial, UCL, and York have. Very robust, prestigious universities that I think have understood that there's a market for people that want to retrain. And it doesn't mean that with 1 year of computer science conversion masters are they going to become ML wizards? No, but I think the combination of having sort of strong enough understanding, albeit general, but a grasp, plus their respective professional experience could really sort of turbocharge like this type of innovation. So my like I'm a bit skeptical about sort of government top-down efforts on reskilling, like that there's very frankly very little evidence in the literature about them working. But to enable, particularly again, to reward universities, to reward institutions that provide those type of hybrid reskilling is the way to go.
Great, thank you. Any other comments about considerations or the discussion which has taken place quite fruitfully?
I think some considerations, and maybe this is playing like devil's advocate a bit, but like, you'll see we've got these like open models and, we can host them ourselves. And let's say I'm an organization and I host an open model myself and I commercialize that. And then that service that I then build and provide to customers produces like, copyrighted information, for example. That's a scenario where sometimes I might be liable because I've hosted that service. I've, taken that open model. And so some organizations are like potentially using like hosting services as like coverage, but it's such a gray area and such an undefined like thing where like, so for example, I'll give an example. I think Copilot right now, if it produces copyrighted information, Microsoft provide the coverage for it, right? And I'm not saying that there's any like scenarios where copyrighted information has come out of like something like that, but it's that liability and that risk that is now, as we start to put some of these like tools in production, there's a lot of unanswered questions around, okay, who's like liable, who's taking the risk, and then it's starting to like organizations are now starting to ask questions. Okay, if I've got lots of different parts of my business using AI models, and some of them are hosting them internally, some of them are using external services, can I understand, okay, what data is actually going out to those services if it is like outside my remit? And can I provide, guardrails around that? Can I put rate limits on it because I've got a budget and I don't want people going crazy with LLMs? So there's lots of different like topics around the considerations, and I think everyone's got very excited about the productivity gains that can potentially be gained, but then we haven't necessarily, as like I guess it's like an industry thought it through from a consideration perspective of what's going to happen, right? I think even regulations falling behind a bit in terms of putting something concrete around this and if it's going to, right? There's no clear stance of if regulation is going to come out or if it's not going to come out, So there are things around this that I think are still yet to be defined, which makes it all the more interesting, right? So.
Definitely, certainly going to be a live area for quite some time. Thank you. I think although we have probably 20 minutes left in this segment, I'm mindful that some individuals may drop off slightly earlier. So I may just hand over to the audience, those who are dialed into this call for any questions, I think, off the back of this particular conversation. So happy to hand over to anyone who may want to use the chat function. Otherwise, I may put one or two questions to the panel if not. Okay, no worries. Quite a shy start to September, I suppose. No worries. Are there any, I suppose, just sort of thinking about this particular discussion, are there any sort of particular, let's say, sectors or industries where, I guess in your experience, would you say open source it seems to be applied more than others? Would you say, are there any particular sectors where, let's say, there are certain hurdles that need to be surmounted? I think probably a question which I didn't sort of note down, but just sort of came to my head just now.
I mean, in terms of what I see, defense and health are like really big for open source because of the data sovereignty stuff that I talked about. So just a couple of like really nice examples. I always think actually sometimes you get through a whole call and actually not have talked about an example of what someone's done with it. We've done some work with the AI Centre for Value-Based Healthcare, very short title there, which is part of Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital, which is a well-renowned London-based hospital. And they are fine-tuning llama models. One's called OncoLlama, which I do love, to speed up cancer trial recruitment by extracting patient data. So, that's NHS data. You can't just have that anywhere. So that's a really great use case for open source because it's fine tuning and it's about data sovereignty. So Llama pretty much was one of the only options really for it, and also performed super well as well. So that's just a really great use case. So health and defense, for the reasons I sort of mentioned, there's two sectors we see a lot of Llama uptake.
Fantastic, and I think if there are cases where AI can be deployed to improve public services and again improve the quality of lives of citizens, I think that's the key thing. Beyond profit maximization, increasing revenues, sort of B2B use cases, but the actual sort of social contract where there are tangible examples. So yeah, thank you for that. Sorry, Erica, Sahil, did you want to come in?
Yeah, it's just along those lines actually, because I work with public sector customers in the UK, and I definitely see the value of open source as well. In use cases where you start with just potentially working with documents. Sometimes when you look at generative AI, you think about like maybe the more advanced use cases, but there's also an entry point which is really trying to augment the people's skills. Ultimately, there's always a discussion about will AI have an impact on my job, but I think not in terms of like taking away jobs, but more in terms of like augmenting people's skills. It could be again, with some departments just trying to work on documents and try to derive information from those data. Many departments, they have backlog in just policies that they need to upload, or citizens that they need to send documents. So this is a use case that we see quite commonly actually across my customers.
I think also in general, from just add on to your point, Usman, around frameworks. Like if I think about like what open source embodies and like where like you typically see a lot of good cutting edge open source come from, it's typically like research. Sometimes they're creating like some sort of framework or some sort of application, but there's like research think tanks trying to create the next best model or the next best kind of framework for creating a model. Like we're still utilizing transformers, but we've just cut up the way we utilize transformers, right? And so we might see a lot of like progression in those areas, and I'm excited to see what comes out of like research and research think tanks over the next few years, with a lot of money being put into this area. But then another thing, which is slightly off topic, but another thing that I'm seeing across the industry as well is, if I'm using an open source model and I'm hosting it, myself, on infrastructure that I have, it means that I can, take that and host it wherever I want, whenever I want. I've got a portable use case that I can fit wherever, right? And you see like some of the like accelerators that like I.AI building, right? They're trying to build something that works on any cloud, and that's gonna like help them fit it into multiple government departments. When you think of a larger organization, they're probably using lots of different technologies, Databricks, AWS, Azure, and they need to create a solution that's going to be able to fit on any of them, because you're not going to make an organization change just because one model isn't available, right? So it needs to be that's going to be something that is going to encourage more and more organizations to put stuff out into open source. Like we even saw OpenAI release some open source models, right? I think they now know that that this is the way to go in terms of progressing the industry. So yeah.
Thank you. Brilliant. I'm mindful, I'm conscious of time. I think a few people may have to drop off, so we may have to wrap up the session slightly earlier. But I think before the numbers do drop off, I do want to just share a few more pieces of information. So we do have
one question, Usman.
Oh, sorry. Okay. 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 What would the panel think about the other side of open source models, particularly the use of them to augment hackers and other malign activity? Can open source models still maintain some ethics and regulation to protect against the dangers of AI? From Ben. Yeah, very, very valid question.
I can probably start and give my opinion and my view. I think because this is like kind of the elephant in the room. It's also for open source technologies. It's always been, oh, well, they're open, so everyone can use or misuse the technology. The reality is that you have been more eyes looking at the technology, so you can address those vulnerabilities quickly, actually. And the same applies for AI as well. To me, that also like, techniques that are available, like guardrails. Ultimately, that's quite common use for developers to make sure that there's a balance between transparency and misuse.
Completely. Any other thoughts or observations in relation to that question? Okay. If not, then I may just share a few more pieces of information. So first of all, we'll sort of end the session momentarily, but before I do, we do have a few more upcoming events looking into conversational AI, frugal AI, and also multimodal. So just wanted to thank what has been an incredible lineup of speakers and a really fruitful discussion, which I think certainly can certainly last longer. So my thanks to obviously Erica, Sahil, Kevin, and Sophie for sharing their insights and expertise. Do add them on LinkedIn if you like, and please do check out any additional resources. We will have a recording of this session online, likely in the coming days. But if you do have any questions in the meantime, please do drop me a line. But on behalf of techUK and indeed all the speakers today, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Take care. Bye.